Chapter 3, Part 2 of Gigolo by Edna Ferber. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Gigolo, Part 2. All Europe was dancing. It seemed a death dance, grotesque, convulsive, hideous. Paris, Nice, Berlin, Budapest, Rome, Vienna, London writhed and twisted and turned and jiggled. St. Vitus himself never imagined contortions such as these. In the narrow side street dance rooms of Florence and in the great avenue restaurants of Paris they were performing exactly the same gyrations. Wiggle, squirm, shake. And over all, the American jazz music boomed and whanged its syncopation. On the music racks of violinists who had meant to be Elmans or Chryslers were sheets entitled Jazz Baby Foxtrot. Drums, horns, cymbals, castanets, sandpaper. So the mannequins and marionettes of Europe tried to whirl themselves into forgetfulness. The Americans thought Giddy was a Frenchman. The French knew him for an American, dress as he would. Dancing became with him a profession, no, a trade. He danced flawlessly, holding and guiding his partner impersonally, firmly, expertly, in spite of the weak right arm. It served well enough. Gideon-Gory had always been a naturally rhythmic dancer. Then, too, he had been fond of dancing. Years of practice had perfected him. He adopted now the manner and position of the professional. As he danced, he held his head rather stiffly to one side and a little down, the chin jutting out just a trifle. The effect was at the same time stiff and chic. His footwork was infallible. The intricate and imbecilic steps of the day he performed in flawless sequence. Under his masterly guidance, the feet of the least rhythmic were suddenly endowed with deftness and grace. One swayed with him as naturally as with an elemental force. He danced politely and almost wordlessly, unless first addressed, according to the code of his kind. His touch was firm, yet remote. The dance concluded, he conducted his partner to her seat, bowed stiffly from the waist, heels together, and departed. For these services he was handed 10 francs, 20 francs, 30 francs, or more if lucky, depending on the number of times he was called upon to dance with a partner during the evening. Thus was dancing, the most spontaneous and unartificial of the muses, vulgarized, commercialized, prostituted. Lower than Gideon-Gory, of Winnebago, Wisconsin, had fallen, could no man fall. Sometimes he danced in Paris. During the high season he danced in Nice. Afternoon and evening found him busy in the hot, perfumed, overcrowded dance salons. The Negresco, the Roule, Maxime's, Belle Meunière, the Casina Municipale. He learned to make his face go a perfect blank, pale, cryptic, expressionless. Between himself and the other boys of his ilk there was little or no professional comradeship. A weird lot they were, young, though their faces were strangely lacking in the look of youth. All of them had been in the war. Most of them had been injured. There was Aubin, the Frenchman. The right side of Aubin's face was rather startlingly handsome in its Greek perfection. It was like a profile chiselled. The left side was another face, the same and yet not the same. It was as though you saw the left side out of drawing, or blurred, or out of focus. It puzzled you. It shocked you. The left side of Aubin's face had been done over by an army surgeon, who, though deft and scientific, had not had a hand expert as that of the original sculptor. Then there was Mazzetti, the Roman. He parted his hair on the wrong side, and under the black wing of it was a deep groove into which you could lay a forefinger. A piece of shell had ploughed it neatly. The Russian boy, who called himself Orloff, had the look in his eyes of one who has seen things upon which eyes never should have looked. He smoked constantly, and ate, apparently, not at all. Among these there existed a certain unwritten code and certain unwritten signals. You did not take away the paying partner of a fellow gigolo. If in too great demand, you turned your surplus partners over to gigolos unemployed. You did not accept less than 10 francs. They all broke this rule. Sometimes Gédéon Goré made 10 francs a day, sometimes 20, sometimes 50, infrequently 100. Sometimes not enough to pay for his one decent meal a day. At first he tried to keep fit by walking a certain number of miles daily along the ocean front, but usually he was too weary to persist in this. He did not think at all. He felt nothing. Sometimes, down deep, deep in a long-forgotten part of his being, a voice called, feebly, plaintively, to the man who had been Giddy Gorry. But he shut his ears and mind and consciousness, and would not listen. The American girls were best, the gigolos all agreed, and they paid well, though they talked too much. Gédéon Goré was a favourite among them. They thought he was so foreign-looking, and kind of sad and stern and everything. His French, fluent, colloquial, and bewildering, awed them. They would attempt to speak to him in halting and hackneyed phrases acquired during 3 years at Mrs. Pence's select school at Hastings-on-the-Hudson. At the cost of about $1,000 a word, they would enunciate, painfully, Je pense que Nice est la plus belle ville de France. Giddy, listening courteously, his head inclined, as though unwilling to miss one conversational pearl falling from the pretty American's lips, would appear to consider this gravely. Then, sometimes, in an unexpected burst of pure mischief, he would answer, You said something, some burg, I'm telling the world. The girl, startled, would almost leap back from the confines of his arms, only to find his face stern, immobile, his eyes sombre, reflective. Why, where did you pick that up? His eyebrows would go up. His face would express complete lack of comprehension. Pardon? Afterward, at home, in Toledo or Kansas City or Los Angeles, the girl would tell about it. I suppose some American girl taught it to him, just for fun. It sounded too queer, because his French was so wonderful. He danced divinely. A Frenchman, and so aristocratic. Think of his being a professional partner. They have them over there, you know. Everybody's dancing in Europe. And gay. Why, you'd never know there'd been a war. Mary Hubble, of the Winnebago Hubbles, did not find it so altogether gay. Mary Hubble, with her father, Orson J. Hubble, and her mother, B. Hubble, together with what appeared to be practically the entire white population of the United States, came to Europe early in 1922, there to travel, to play, to rest, to behold, and to turn their good hard American dollars into cordwood-sized bundles of German marks, Austrian kronen, Italian lire, and French francs. Most of the men regarded Europe as a wine list. In their mental geography, Rheims, Rhine, Moselle, Bordeaux, Champagne, or Würzburg were not localities, but libations. The women, for the most part, went in for tortoise-shell combs, fringed silk shawls, jade earrings, beaded bags, and coral neck-chains. Up and down the famous thoroughfare of Europe went the absurd pale blue tweed tailleur and the lavender tweed cape suits of America's wives and daughters. Usually, after the first month or two, they shed these respectable middle-class habiliments for what they fondly believed to be smart Paris costumes. And you could almost invariably tell a good moral church-going matron of the Middle West by the fact that she was got up like a demi-mondaine of the second class, in the naive belief that she looked French and chic. The three Hubbles were thoroughly nice people. Mary Hubble was more than thoroughly nice. She was a darb. She had done a completely good job during the war, including the expert driving of a wild and unbroken Ford up and down the shell-torn roads of France. One of those small-town girls with a big-town outlook, a well-trained mind, a slim, boyish body, a good, clear skin, and a steady eye that saw. Mary Hubble wasn't a beauty by a good many measurements, but she had her points, as witness the number of bouquets, bundles, books, and bonbons piled in her cabin when she sailed. The well-trained mind and the steady, seeing eye enabled Mary Hubble to discover that Europe wasn't so gay as it seemed to the blind, and she didn't write home to the effect that you'd never know there'd been a war. The Hubbles had the best that Europe could afford. Orson J. Hubble, a mild-mannered, grey-haired man with a nice flat waistline and a good keen eye, hence Mary's, adored his womenfolk and spoiled them. During the first years of his married life he had been Hubble the drayman, as Giddy Gorry had said. He had driven one of his 3 drays himself, standing sturdily in the front of the red-painted wooden 2-horse wagon as it rattled up and down the main business thoroughfare of Winnebago. But the war and the soaring freight rates had dealt generously with Orson Hubble. As railroad and shipping difficulties increased, the Hubble draying business waxed prosperous. Factories, warehouses, and wholesale business firms could be assured that their goods would arrive promptly, safely, and cheaply when conveyed by a Hubble van. So now the 3 red-painted wooden horse-driven drays were magically transformed into a great fleet of monster motor vans that plied up and down the state of Wisconsin, and even into Michigan and Illinois and Indiana. The Orson J. Hubble Transportation Company, you read. And below, in yellow lettering on the red background, "Have Hubble do your hauling." There was actually $1 million in it, and more to come. The buying of the old Gorry house on the river bluff had been one of the least of Orson's feats. And now that house was honeycombed with sleeping porches and linen closets and enamel fittings and bathrooms white and glittering as an operating auditorium. and there were shower baths, and blue rugs, and great soft fuzzy bath towels, and little white innocent guest towels embroidered with curly H's, whose tails writhed at you from all corners. Orson J. and Mrs. Hubble had never been in Europe before, and they enjoyed themselves enormously. That is to say, Mrs. Orson J. did, and Orson, seeing her happy, enjoyed himself vicariously. His hand slid in and out of his inexhaustible pocket almost automatically now. And "how much?" was his favourite locution. They went everywhere, did everything. Mary boasted a pretty fair French. Mrs. Hubble conversed in the various languages of Europe by speaking pidgin English very loud, and omitting all verbs, articles, adverbs, and other cumbersome superfluities. Thus to the fille de chambre: "Me out, now you beds." The red-cheeked one from the provinces understood, in some miraculous way, that Mrs. Hubble was now going out, and that the beds could be made and the rooms tidied. They reached Nice in February, and plunged into its gaieties. "Just think," exclaimed Mrs. Hubble rapturously, "only 3 francs for a facial or a manicure, and 2 for a Marcel. It's like finding them." "If the Mediterranean gets any bluer," said Mary, "I don't think I can stand it. It's so lovely." Mrs. Hubble at tea expressed a desire to dance. Mary at tea desired to dance, but didn't express it. Orson J. loathed tea, and the early draying business had somewhat unfitted his sturdy legs for the lighter movements of the dance. But he wanted only their happiness. So he looked about a bit, and asked some questions, and came back. "Seems there's a lot of young chaps who make a business of dancing with the women folks who haven't dancing men along. Hotel hires 'em. Funny to us, but I guess it's all right, and quite the same thing around here. You pay 'em so much a dance, or so much an afternoon. You girls want to try it?" "I do," said Mrs. Orson J. Hubble. "It doesn't sound respectable. Then that's what all those little thin chaps are who have been dancing with those pretty American girls? They're sort of ratty looking, aren't they? What do they call 'em? That's a nice looking one, over there. No, dancing with the girl in grey, I mean. If that's one, I'd like to dance with him, Orson. Good land! What would the Winnebago ladies say? What do they call 'em, I wonder?" Mary had been gazing very intently at the nice-looking one over there, who was dancing with the girl in grey. She answered her mother's question, still gazing at him. "They call them gigolos," she said slowly. Then, "Get that one, Dad, will you, if you can? You dance with him first, Mother, and then "I can get 2, volunteered Orson J. "No," said Mary Hubble sharply. The nice-looking gigolo seemed to be in great demand, but Orson J. succeeded in capturing him after the 3rd dance. It turned out to be a tango, and though Mrs. Hubble, pretty well scared, declared that she didn't know it and couldn't dance it, the nice-looking gigolo assured her, through the medium of Mary's interpretation, that Mrs. Hubble had only to follow his guidance. It was quite simple. He did not seem to look directly at Mary, or at Orson J., or at Mrs. Hubble as he spoke. The dance concluded. Mrs. Hubble came back, breathless, but enchanted. "He has beautiful manners," she said aloud in English. "And dance! You feel like a swan when you're dancing with him. Try him, Mary." The gigolo's face, as he bowed before her, was impassive, inscrutable. But "Sh!" said Mary. "Nonsense. Doesn't understand a word." Mary danced the next dance with him. They danced wordlessly until the dance was half over. Then, abruptly, Mary said in English, "What's your name?" Close against him she felt a sudden little sharp contraction of the gigolo's diaphragm, the contraction that reacts to surprise or alarm. But he said, in French, "Pardon." So, "What's your name?" said Mary, in French this time. The gigolo, with the beautiful manners, hesitated longer than really beautiful manners should permit. But finally, "Je m'appelle Gédéon-Goré." He pronounced it in his most nasal, perfect Paris French. It didn't even sound remotely like Gideon Gorey. "My name's Hubble," said Mary, in her pretty, fair French. "Mary Hubble. I come from a little town called Winnebago." The Gorey eyebrow expressed polite disinterestedness. "That's in Wisconsin," continued Mary, "and I love it." "Naturellement," agreed the gigolo stiffly. They finished the dance without further conversation. Mrs. Hubble had the next dance, Mary the next. They spent the afternoon dancing until dinner time. Orson Jay's fee, as he handed it to the gigolo, was the kind that mounted grandly into dollars instead of mere francs. The gigolo's face, as he took it, was not more inscrutable than Mary's as she watched him take it. From that afternoon, throughout the next 2 weeks, if any girl as thoroughly fine as Mary Hubble could be said to run after any man, Mary ran after that gigolo. At the same time, one could almost have said that he tried to avoid her. Mary took a course of tango lessons, and urged her mother to do the same. Even Orson Jay noticed it. "Look here," he said in kindly protest, "aren't you getting pretty thick with this jigger?" "Sociological study, Dad. I'm all right." "Yeah, you're all right. But how about him?" "He's all right, too." The gigolo resisted Mary's unmaidenly advances, and yet, when he was with her, he seemed sometimes to forget to look sombre and blank and remote. They seemed to have a lot to say to each other. Mary talked about America a good deal, about her home town. "And big elms and maples and oaks in the yard. The Fox River Valley. Middle West. Normal Avenue. Cass Street. Fox River paper mills." She talked in French and English. The gigolo confessed, one day, to understanding some English, though he seemed to speak none. After that, Mary, when very much in earnest, or when enthusiastic, spoke in her native tongue altogether. She claimed an intense interest in European after-war conditions, in reconstruction, in the attitude toward life of those millions of young men who had actually participated in the conflict. She asked questions that might have been considered impertinent, not to say nervy. "Now you," she said brutally, "are a person of some education, refinement, and background. Yet you are content to dance around in these well, back home a chap might wash dishes in a cheap restaurant, or run an elevator in an East Side New York loft building, but he'd never—" A very faint, dull red crept suddenly over the pallor of the gigolo's face. They were sitting out on a bench, on the promenade facing the ocean, in direct defiance, on Mary's part, of all rules of conduct of respectable girls toward Gigolo. Mary Hubble had said rather brusque things before, but now, for the first time, the young man defended himself faintly. "For us," he replied in his exquisite French, "it is finished. For us there is nothing. This generation, it is no good. I am no good. They are no good." He waved a hand in a gesture that included the promenaders, the musicians in the cafes, the dancers, the crowds eating and drinking at the little tables lining the walk. "What rot!" said Mary Hubble briskly. "They probably said exactly the same thing in Asia after Alexander had got through with them. I suppose there was such dancing and general devilment in Macedonia that every one said the younger generation had gone to the dogs since the war, and the world would never amount to anything again. But it seemed to pick up, didn't it?" The boy turned and looked at her squarely for the first time, his eyes meeting hers. Mary looked at him. She even swayed toward him a little, her lips parted. There was about her a breathlessness, an expectancy. So they sat for a moment, and between them the air was electric, vibrant. Then, slowly, he relaxed, sat back, slumped a little on the bench. Over his face, that for a moment had been alight with something vital, there crept again the look of defeat, of sombre indifference. At sight of that look, Mary Hubble's jaw set. She leaned forward. She clasped her fine large hands tight. She did not look at the gigolo, but out across the blue Mediterranean and beyond it. Her voice was low and a little tremulous, and she spoke in English only. "It isn't finished here, in Europe. But it's sick. Back home in America, though, it's alive, and growing. I wish I could make you understand what it's like there. It's all new and crude, maybe, and ugly, but it's so darned healthy and sort of clean. I love it. I love every bit of it. I know I sound like a flag waver, but I don't care. I mean it. I know it's sentimental, but I'm proud of it. The kind of thing I feel about the United States is the kind of thing Mencken sneers at. You don't know who Mencken is. He's a critic who pretends to despise everything because he's really a sentimentalist and afraid somebody'll find it out. I don't say that I don't appreciate the beauty of all this Italy and France and England and Germany. But it doesn't get me the way just the mention of a name will get me back home. This trip, for example, why, last summer 4 of us, 3 other girls and I, motored from Wisconsin to California, and we drove every inch of the way ourselves. The Santa Fe Trail, the ocean-to-ocean highway, the Lincoln Highway, the Dixie Highway, the Yellowstone Trail. The very sound of those words gives me a sort of prickly feeling. They mean something so big and vital and new. I get a thrill out of them that I haven't had once over here. Why, even this—" She threw out a hand that included and dismissed the whole sparkling panorama before her. "This doesn't begin to give the jolt that I got out of Walla Walla and Butte and Missoula and Spokane and Seattle and Albuquerque. We drove all day and ate ham and eggs at some little hotel or lunch counter at night, and outside the hotel the drummers would be sitting, talking and smoking, And there were Western men, very tanned and tall and lean, in those big 2-gallon hats, and khaki pants and puttees. And there were sunsets and sand and cactus and mountains and campers and Fords. I can smell the Kansas cornfields, and I can see the Iowa farms and the ugly little raw American towns, and the big thin American men and the grain elevators near the railroad stations. And I know those towns weren't the way towns ought to look. They were ugly and crude and new. Maybe it wasn't all beautiful, but, gosh, it was real and growing and big and alive. Alive! Mary Hubble was crying. There on the bench along the promenade in the sunshine at Nice, she was crying. The boy beside her suddenly rose, uttered a little inarticulate sound, and left her there on the bench in the sunshine, vanished completely in the crowd. For 3 days the Orson J. Hubbles did not see their favourite gigolo. If Mary was disturbed, she did not look it, though her eye was alert in the throng. During the 3 days of their gigolo's absence, Mrs. Hubble and Mary availed themselves of the professional services of the Italian gigolo Mazzetti. Mrs. Hubble said she thought his dancing was, if anything, more nearly perfect than that what's-his-name. But his manner wasn't so nice, and she didn't like his eyes, sort of sneaky. Mary said she thought so too. Nevertheless, she was undoubtedly affable toward him, and talked in French, and laughed, and even walked with him, apparently in complete ignorance of the fact that these things were not done. Mazzetti spoke frequently of his colleague Goré, and always in terms of disparagement. A low fellow, a clumsy dancer, one unworthy of Mary's swan-like grace, unfit to receive Orson J. Hubble's generous fees. Late one evening, during the mid-week after-dinner dance, Goré appeared suddenly in the doorway. It was 10 o'clock. The Hubbles were dallying with their after-dinner coffee at one of the small tables about the dance-floor. Mary, keen-eyed, saw him first. She beckoned Mazzetti, who stood in attendance beside Mrs. Hubble's chair. She snatched up the wrap that lay at hand and rose. "It's stifling in here. I'm going out on the promenade for a breath of air. Come on." She plucked at Mazzetti's sleeve and actually propelled him through the crowd and out of the room. She saw Goré's startled eyes follow them. She even saw him crossing swiftly to where her mother and father sat. Then she vanished into the darkness with Mazzetti, and the Mazzettis put but one interpretation upon a young woman who strolls into the soft darkness of the promenade with a gigolo. And Mary Hubble knew this. Gédéon Goré stood before Mr. and Mrs. Orson J. Hubble. "Where is your daughter?" he demanded in French. "Oh, how do you do?" chirped Mrs. Hubble. "Well, it's Mr. Goré. We missed you. I hope you haven't been sick." "Where is your daughter?" demanded Gédéon Goré in French. "Where is Mary?" Mrs. Hubble caught the word Mary. "Oh, Mary? Why, she's gone out for a walk with Mr. Mazzetti." "Good God!" said Gédéon Goré in perfectly plain English, and vanished. Orson J. Hubble sat a moment, thinking. Then, "Why, say, he talked English. That young French fella talked English." The young French fella, hatless, was skimming down the Promenade des Anglais, looking intently ahead and behind and to the side and all around in the darkness. He seemed to be following a certain trail, however. At one side of the great wide walk, facing the ocean, was a canopied band-stand. In its dim shadow he discerned a wisp of white. He made for it, swiftly, silently. Mazzetti's voice, low, eager, insistent. Mazzetti's voice, hoarse, ugly, importunate. The figure in white rose. Goré stood before the two. The girl took a step toward him, but Mazzetti took 2 steps, and snarled like a villain in a movie, if a villain in a movie could be heard to snarl. "Get out of here," said Mazzetti in French to Goré. "You pig! Swine! To intrude when I talk with a lady! You are finished. Now she belongs to me." "The hell she does," said giddy Gorry in perfectly plain American, and swung for Mazzetti with his bad right arm. Mazzetti, after the fashion of his kind, let fly in most unsportsmanlike fashion with his feet, kicking at Giddy's stomach and trying to bite with his small, sharp yellow teeth. And then Gideon's left, that had learned some neat tricks of boxing in the days of the gory greatness, landed fairly on Mazzetti's nose, and with a howl of pain and rage and terror, the Mazzetti, a hand clapped to that bleeding feature, fled into the darkness. And "Oh, Giddy," said Mary, "I thought you'd never come." Mary Hubble, did you know all the time? You did, didn't you? You think I'm a bum, don't you? Don't you?" Her hand on his shoulder. "Giddy, I've been stuck on you since I was 9 years old in Winnebago. I kept track of you all through the war, though I never once saw you. Then I lost you. Giddy, when I was a kid, I used to look at you from the sidewalk through the hedge of the house on Cass. Honestly, Giddy. But look at me now. Why, Mary, I'm no good. Why, I don't see how you ever knew." "It takes more than a Greek nose and French clothes and a bum arm to fool me, Gid. Do you know there were a lot of photographs of you left up in the attic of the Cass Street house when we bought it? I know them all by heart, Giddy, by heart. Come on, Giddy, let's go home." End of chapter 3, part 2.